Welcome everybody. This edition of the Women in Residential Property Guide to a Property Transaction is all about surveys. I'm delighted to be joined by Sirah Parks of SDL Surveyors, who are long-standing sponsors of WERP. Welcome, Sirah. Great to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too, Emma.
Could you start just by telling us a little bit, Sirah, about your role and how you actually got into surveying?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a senior regional managing surveyor for SDL, and most of my immediate team are based across the central of England, across to Birmingham to the west, just touching on the Welsh borders, I guess, and then right the way across to East Anglia and parts of Suffolk, and including Cambridge, so quite a big patch. I got into surveying. I did a 4-year sandwich degree at Nottingham-Trent. I then went to work for Mansfield Brewery and managed their unlicensed estate. And I didn't fall into residential valuation for a few years. I was in landlord tenant, managing portfolios of industrial units, and then fell into residential. It appealed to me a little bit more, and it also meant that I could have a bit more work-life balance and more autonomy over my working day as I then began to have children. And I'm a fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So it's been a career of about 25 years.
Fantastic. And I'm guessing quite a big change going from pubs and industrial units to people's houses.
Yes, that's right. I have to remind myself that when they offer me a drink, it's a coffee or tea and not a beer or a gin. But apart from that, yeah.
How disappointing.
I know. But yes, no, I mean, it is different. But I think from the actual professional level, you go in as a surveyor, and whether you're looking at a piece of land, a house, an industrial shed, offices, shops, you're immediately looking at location, size, defects, what's the pros and what's the cons. So essentially, as a chartered surveyor, you would always look, you'd have those immediate little tick lists that are going on in your head.
And talk to me about the role of a residential surveyor in the context of the home purchase process. How do you get involved in that?
Right. What happens is generally we have 2 avenues to be instructed. One will be an individual who's buying a property may ring us up and they'll have done a search and say, who can do me a survey on my house? Or their bank will upsell, along with their mortgage valuation, a home buyer survey. That means that we'll either get instructed to do the mortgage valuation for the lender and we'll do the survey, or they'll come to us and just ask for a standalone survey. So they're the 2 ways that we can get instructed and involved, but it's only at the point of purchase. And usually most people would not invest in a survey until they'd had an offer agreed at that point. We don't generally get involved in any kind of other surveys where somebody who already owns a house then wants a survey doing, which might be a structural survey. That would be something that would be done by somebody else later on down the line.
Okay, and what's the difference between what lots of people call a valuation survey or a mortgage valuation and a home survey or a condition report? How do those 2 differ?
Good question. And this is something that causes a lot of confusion with the general public. And I know that a lot of banks and ourselves have really scripted ourselves much better and clearer, just so as we make sure that anybody buying a property understands fully what they can and can't rely on. So essentially, a mortgage valuation, which is not really a survey, it's more of an inspection so that we can get the bits that we need to provide the bank with an informed valuation. That's something that comes direct from the bank, only the bank can rely on. So even if the purchaser gets a copy of the mortgage valuation report, they can't rely on it because the contract is between the surveyor and the bank lender client. It's a basic walkthrough. We will list the accommodation, we'll list any defects, but only defects that might lead to further diminishment in the value or the fabric of the building. With a survey, we are going purely for the purchaser, and they have privy and access to that report that's sent to them direct. Valuation, if both are done at the same time, should always be much of a muchness. The difference with a survey would be a home buyer survey would be we would be at the property an hour and a half, 2 hours. we would do a much more thorough inspection. We'd be looking at the condition of the external elements as well as all the internal elements. We'd do an inspection of the services, and we'd pass a condition rating on all the different elements. That report the purchaser can rely on. We will also give them advice. Who else do you need to call to get proper professional advice on specialist things like services or the roof, if we've seen anything that concerns us. So really, the confusion is that sometimes they're both termed as surveys, but a mortgage valuation is just an inspection to lead to a valuation report for the bank's lending purposes. And a survey is something that is instructed by the purchaser, and they can rely on it, and it gives them an overall condition report, and it allows them to take a view as to what they might need to do in the near, middle and distant future.
Okay, that's brilliant. And we hear about surveyors talking about level 1s and level 2s sometimes. Is a level 1 a mortgage valuation?
Yes.
And level?
Yeah, we've tried to not to use the jargon anymore. As surveyors, we were quite guilty of using a lot of jargon, and I know that on occasion I've been stood with new house builders and we've been talking about CMLs and first fix, second fix, and even the ladies that were in the sales office would sit and frown at us as if to say, you know, you're talking in absolute code. And I think what has become apparent within the industry and the way that we've, along with the RICS, changed the way that we report for surveys is that we need to not use the jargon. So yes, the level 1 is a basic valuation, inspection and mortgage valuation for lending purposes for the lender, and a level 2 is something that's a much more holistic survey that the purchaser can rely on.
And just briefly, Sarah, you've mentioned RICS. So just for our listeners who aren't familiar, that's the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. So that's your professional body.
It is. That's our membership body, and all lender clients require that we are members of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and that we have different levels of membership, and those different levels of membership will allow us to work for different lenders and value up to different levels of property. So yeah, and I'm, you know, our PI providers as well would be very interested to know that we are fully qualified. And I think being a member of that body also means that we carry out, as a result of that, compulsory CPD, the continuing professional development every year. That we make sure we're up to date on legislation.
Brilliant. And we've talked about mortgage valuations or level 1s, as we've just learned they're also called.
Yeah.
Are they sometimes done without a surveyor visiting the property, or does the surveyor always have to visit the property for a valuation?
No, a surveyor doesn't always have to visit the property, and that's changing. The industry has had a big recruitment drive over recent years as we've had more properties that have needed valuing, and obviously the surveyor community has got older, and I don't think we'd encouraged and recruited as many people at the entry level as we needed to. I think we underestimated as an industry just how many surveyors we were going to need. So what some lenders are now doing is they are asking for a desktop valuation, which essentially means they give us the details, they give us the estimated value or the purchase price in the same way, but we will have a look at information that we have privy to that's online. We'll try and get photos, we'll use Google Maps, we'll do Street View, any past reports we have access to, and then we'll use a surveyor comparable tool, which is the same way we would value up a house if we'd physically entered it. As long as we have enough information and that we're safe and we're valuing properly still and not guessing, we can make a few assumptions, but we'll do a desktop. There's also the automated valuation model, which banks are now putting through, which essentially means that they generate what they assume the current value is based on the last valuation and the market increase. It's a calculation. And they will still send those through to us, and they'll say to the local panel surveyor, can you have a look at this? Does this look right? You're the local expert. And we will then give an overview opinion. because as we all know, it doesn't always work quite that way for some houses in some areas.
Okay, so we've got an automated valuation model, a desktop, and then we've got the valuation where the surveyor actually visits the property.
Physically goes into the property, yeah.
And I suspect that one of the good things about the automated valuation model and the desktop is that they can be done fairly quickly.
Absolutely. So what we do with our surveyors is we give all of our surveyors their fixed physical appointments in a day, and most of them get a desktop valuation to do most days. That's how popular it's become.
Okay, that's and I think it's really important that speed, because we hear so much about how long it takes to buy a house. So it's great to hear that the surveying industry is working with the lending industry to speed up that part of the process.
Absolutely. And it does, Emma, it really does. It speeds up the process. We don't have to wait for the occupier to give us access. We don't then have to physically have a surveyor drive to the property. So in theory, it could cut down anything between a week and 10 days on getting the report back, because we're not reliant on anybody else other than it gets fielded to that surveyor's diary. They look at it the same day. SDL are very strict on same day sign off. Of course, there will be times when we can't sign something off the same day. We're waiting for further information or clarification. But the day that we go into a property, we'll sign it off the same day. The day that we get a desktop instruction, we cut that whole appointment building aspect of it, and we just sign it off the same day.
Okay, and how long does it, so if you're actually going to a property and you're going to do a home condition report, if that's a sort of conventional 3-bedroom property, so where I say conventional construction, how long would it actually take a surveyor to inspect the property and then produce the report?
Absolutely. So if they go in to do a home buyer report, and let's say it's traditional 1970s average condition 3-bed semi, we would expect our surveyor to be there around about an hour and a half. And we have an amazing app, a tool that we've built. So our surveyors have the time-saving element that they can pop all of their site note capture into an iPad. In each section, they can take photographs. The site notes are nice and succinct, and we will generate a report from those site notes. The surveyor will go in, they'll check the report, they'll have a look, they'll add phrases that they need. Sometimes they're lender specific, even though it is for the purchaser. So I personally would like to see the home buyer report, and my team and myself, we like to sign off a home buyer report, ideally the same day. I feel that there's nothing clearer about a property in a surveyor's mind than the day that they've been in to look at it. So if you can review it and look at it on the same day, especially with the iPad capture tool that we've now developed for the industry, then that's reasonable. Some surveyors like to go in, review it, sleep on it overnight, review it again and sign it off the next day. But generally, Emma, I would say within 48 hours, we should be sending those reports out. But the industry, when we're instructed, will generally say you will get your report back within 5 working days. But that's something that I really push back on with my team, and we do as our surveyors. We say it's too long, you don't need that long, please, get the report reviewed, checked, and out to the client.
And are there some types of home that require a surveyor with special expertise, or do surveyors do all types of properties or all types of residential property?
Yeah, no, you're right there in that there are some specialist surveyors that are required for certain properties. So for instance, if we had a listed building, we would return that as an instruction for a home buyer report. Generally, listed buildings require a much more detailed eye. They need someone who's used to dealing with those types of properties. And listed buildings have always got a slightly quirky vernacular architecture, as you and I would both know, Emma, living in properties of that type. So you need someone that's used to looking at them. That's not to say that somebody that works within my team and company couldn't capably do a home buyer on a listed building, but that product is not suitable, we would say you would need to instruct a building surveyor, and not just any building surveyor, a building surveyor who has experience in that type of property.
Okay, and what about sort of homes of multiple occupancy or flats, for example? Do they require a different expertise to a two up, two down, or?
Yeah, we can do home buyer reports on flats, and it's down to the surveyor to take a view on the complexity of the flat, the condition, whether it's a converted building or whether it was built as flats. So that's down to the surveyor to have a look at that and decide whether it's suitable for a home buyer. So flats don't rule out home buyers. If it's an HMO, we wouldn't really be looking to do a home buyer on that, purely and simply because we don't do HMO mortgage valuations. They are slightly more complex and the rules are different around the valuation process. So that would be a different sort of lending model, and also accessing houses where they have multiple locks on doors. I'll guarantee you that if you ever go into a house that's an HMO, having done HMO valuations in the past, the chances are rare that you can get into every room of that house when you go. Somebody will have always locked the door, and then you have to go back again. So no, we wouldn't be looking to do home buyers on an HMO unless it had been sold as a single family unit, and we could access it all.
Okay. So some types of properties, listed properties, HMOs, would require a different or a surveyor with specific expertise and probably aren't suitable for a home condition report. Importantly, though, flats might be suitable for a home condition report.
They might be, that's right. It just depends on the flat, the age, the construction. But we'd have a few caveats with a flat. We'd obviously have to let the purchaser know that we've only been able to inspect the subject property and communal areas, and we've only been able to look at it from ground level. So that does restrict the visibility of the building, and we can't access all of it. But other than that, as long as we can access all of the flat in question, and it's a reasonable build, then and nothing specialist or quirky, then yeah, we can go ahead and do a home buyer on that.
Okay, and you know, is there a, so if somebody's buying a new build, a brand new house, I'm guessing they're probably not going to need a home condition report, are they? Because you'd hope that it's all in great condition.
You would. It's a great question, actually. I'm going to be very measured in my answer to this one. Yes, of course, we'd hope it would be built to current modern build regs, and it will be absolutely fine. And we have the big house builders on the sites, and we get to know them really well in our areas. Very often, if we do a mortgage valuation, we won't actually see the physical site. We will get given the drawings, the plans. They might be 4, 5, 6 months off completion. So even with a mortgage val, the chances are with a new build we might not see it, and we might not ever see it completed until that purchaser remortgages. Sorry, Emma, what was the...
So sort of, I'm wondering at what age a property, if you were advising somebody who was buying, I don't know, a house that was bought maybe 10 years ago, should they have a home buyer's report, or do you think everything would still be fine? Or
I would say yes, and the reason being that any property of any age, I've done home buyer surveys on new builds. Somebody's buying their house for the first time, and it's not necessarily that we're looking for defects. What they want is to just know, what am I buying? What's its construction? How does it work? What might I need to do in a year's time? And of course, we'd hope to see lots of green traffic lights, condition rating ones, but there are other things that we can pick up for them. And we can ask their solicitors to check things like, is the road going to be adopted? Are there any management fees? Does that, although on plan that looks like the shared access is going to work, is it going to work? So yes, I would say, and I've done home buyers on new builds, I would certainly say once anybody is living lived in a house, if you are not going to be the first occupier, we don't know what somebody might or might not have done to a house. It's not so much the original construction, but I've been into houses that are only a few years old, and people have been up into the attic and they've set up a model railway. It's their hobby, and they've sawn through the trusses because they wanted to put a table in and to be able to walk round, and they haven't understood the building pathology and the building loads. And you open the hatch and think, oh, this will be nice and straightforward, and a lovely ladder comes down, and you put your head up and you're, wow, they've floored the loft, they've lined it out, and there's lots of DIY electric lights going on, but you never quite know what you're going to find in something. Whenever you knock on the door, you never know what you're going to find. But I would say that does not preclude new builds. Definitely, if you're buying something, it's a long-term investment. Ask a surveyor to just go and have a survey.
Yeah, the biggest investment most of us will ever make. So really important to take advice from surveyors and indeed listen to what your solicitor says as well. So
absolutely. And we're the only ones as well. We're the only ones that ever go into those properties. So someone buying a house, they go in and they say within the first 5 seconds they've decided they want it. At the door and the gate, they say, I love it, or it's not for me. When we go in, we're totally impartial. We go in and we're looking at structure, and the solicitors cannot be expected to know everything about a property. They won't have visited it. So it's up to us to say to the solicitors on behalf of the lender and or the purchaser, if it's a survey, can you ask the solicitor to look at X, Y, Z? It won't necessarily be obvious at all to the solicitor in the paperwork that something's been adapted and altered, and it won't necessarily be obvious to the person purchasing. So I like to think we're the eyes and ears of not just the lender but the solicitor as well.
And talking about being the eyes and ears, Sirah, can you lift up carpets to check things? I mean, do you move furniture to see what's behind a big wardrobe or something, or?
No, is the answer. We don't, Emma, because we could damage ourselves and damage someone's property. When we go in to do a home report, it is just to look at the structure and the fabric that's visible. We do go into properties where they have had or have an occupier that's a severe hoarder, or there's not been any work done, and we have to recommend that works of clearing the property are done before we can give that purchaser an honest and clear report. There's no point any surveyor going in and saying, limitations on the inspection were, and then a huge great list. I couldn't go into bedroom 1, 2, 3. I couldn't see the bathroom fittings. I mean, we do have houses like that where they are absolutely stacked. And we also don't know with an older property where there is a lot of excess furniture and household goods. We don't know what's going on with the floors. I like to be able to walk into a room and have a little bounce up and down, and I like to be able to get into some corners, even if it's not all corners, but we won't move furniture. We will not damage the fabric. That's just not reasonable.
Yeah, and I often hear people sort of saying, oh, you know, the surveyor said that I needed to get the electrical installation checked. Why can't you comment on things like electrics and plumbing and drainage?
Yeah, and it's a fair question, because we have a section on those services in the report. It is a very fair question of a purchaser to say, well, why do I need to get a specialist in? Those are very specialist areas. We're not plumbers, we're not electricians, we're not drainage specialists, but what we can see with our I guess I'd call it limited experiences, we can see if there's something particularly dangerous, if something's been adapted, if there's a lot of DIY additions, and if we do have major concerns. I mean, we say with all services, really you need to get everything checked, because we don't know since the last service whether anything has been altered or gone wrong. But we would say we're not specialists. We can give you an overview of what appears to be the conditions. So if it's a house that's, let's say, 10 years old, I always take a photograph of the boiler and I ask questions. How old's the boiler? Is it original to the house? Do you have it serviced every year? Have you had any major repairs? that helps me to feed back some information to my purchaser client. But we can't say to them, this boiler is still suitable for this type of house. This is going to give you enough hot water. And things like plug sockets, we can sort of say this house is quite an old house, and at the time it was built, it really wasn't built for everybody having several gadgets that need plugging in. So you might want to think about more electrical sockets or having it upgraded. We can see it hasn't got a modern fuse box. Those are obvious and reasonable things, but everything else, we really need to point them in the direction of a specialist who can really just check that it's safe more than anything.
And I think it comes back to the point we were discussing earlier, Sirah, which is this is the biggest investment most people will ever make. So actually, it is worth time investing in, talking to an electrician about getting an electrical installation condition report, talking to a plumber. I suspect one of the challenges for many people at the moment is that those trades are in such short supply.
Yeah. They are. And one thing I've noticed is I've had sometimes they come back to us after they've had their report done, and that's absolutely part of our service. So we will ring them before we go and say, is there anything specific that you want us to look at? Is there anything specific you're planning on doing with the property? And then I will normally ring my client a day or so after, just to say, you've had your report. Does it all make sense? Is there anything you want to clarify? Because sometimes people read it and think, I'm not really sure, but I feel a bit embarrassed ringing. So I feel to offer them a proper service, let's hold their hands a little bit and be the professionals that we are. And you will get some people who they will read the report, but they won't go and instruct anybody else to do any further inspections, and it is a huge cost. And what we have found, and something that has changed, Emma, is that people are ringing us and saying, do I really have to get a further inspection? Because the local plumber, the local electrician, the local roofing guy has said he won't now do it for free. They're charging. So they'll say, well, I can come a week on Tuesday and it will be £150, because they recognise that their time was being used to do lots of inspections for them to say, yes, it's okay. And they weren't getting any further work out of it. So it's not unusual now for the trades to charge. But personally, I personally think but still do it. Yeah. If you move into a house and the boiler fails, you can be looking up to £5,000 plus the disruption, or the electrics aren't quite safe. It's more about taking care of people, I think, than the cost. Although I know that cost is important, but my sole goal for anybody moving into any property is that, yes, it meets their needs, but that they are safe once they are in that house.
Yeah. And also about giving people an indication of what they might have to spend going forwards, because none of these things, even if the boiler was only installed 10 years ago, it doesn't last forever. So it's budgeting, isn't it, over the life of your time in that house?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Emma, boilers that were installed 10 years ago, 5 years ago, are a lot less likely to last than some of these really old boilers where the heating engineer comes in and says, it's absolutely fine. It's a real good old bit of engineering, and they keep going forever. Whereas some of the more modern boilers are getting better and do have fantastic warranties, but they don't seem to last. They're not quite as robust as some of the older boilers.
And finally, I think what's probably a controversial question is we hear a lot of talk about down valuation. So this is in the context of you're going out to do a mortgage valuation on behalf of the bank. The person who wishes to buy the property has made their offer of 500,000, and you go out and say, as a surveyor, actually, we think it's only worth 475,000. So is that really a down valuation, or is that a surveyor giving a professional opinion?
Well, absolutely, it's the latter, Emma. A surveyor understands it's disappointing when a purchaser doesn't get the mortgage valuation through at the agreed purchase price. The big difference is that a a chartered surveyor, a bank valuer will go in and they will look at that house, take a view, even in a fast upward market where we have 20 viewings and 20 offers, they will take a measured, impartial view of that house in that location, in its condition. They will use completed sales. And while sales have been taking longer during COVID, so some of that completed sales data is a bit older, we still can apply a percentage increase because we have all the house price indexes and nationwide, and various other banks give us data that we can rely on and see how much the market's gone up. So we're looking to protect the lender, but we equally, as disappointing as it is, are looking to protect the purchaser. Because ultimately, if somebody moves into a house and they've maxed and gone for the 90-95% mortgage, loan to value, and then in 2 years' time, and we just rubber stamped it, and then in 2 years' time they think, right, it's now time to do the kitchen and bathroom, and it's still only worth that, they then can't have any additional lending. So they've bought a house with hopes, dreams, aspirations, but they're not going to have that monetary facility to be able to fulfill those. If we let them go in at the start and we get it right at the start, they can take a view. Do we have any extra savings, or are we going to have to forfeit a holiday for the next 2 years to be able to do what we want to do, and have added the value to the property and have seen an increase? And I know it's disappointing. I know sometimes surveyors can be seen as the purchaser's enemy when that happens. We're not downvaluing it. What we're doing is we're putting a correct valuation on it. And there's always room to renegotiate. In red hot markets, as we've experienced, where you do have lots of offers and lots of purchases, you may well get that they then can't have that property, and the next person down will still offer the same, but they've got a bigger deposit. So the valuation, even if it came in at 475, would not be critical to them being able to buy it or not. It is disappointing, and surveyors don't make those decisions lightly. And I'll guarantee you, Emma, they'll usually pick up the phone and ask the selling agent, what did you base that price on? And we always ask them, how many viewings did you have? How many offers? What were the other closest offers? And we always do our best to get as much information that we can.
But and I think the really important points you've made there, Sirah, is that you're doing this to protect not just the lender, the bank, but also to protect the person who's buying the house as well. We can all get very emotional when buying a house, and I know how tempting it is to put an offer in that's £40,000 over the asking price just to get your dream home. But that's not going to be in your best interest necessarily.
It's not. And also I say that I know we've got into this culture of buying and selling, flipping properties, doing up properties. I've bought and sold over 20. I am the biggest culprit for that. But I go in with a bit of an educated view, but I think, and it's funny because as a surveyor, I go in with my head firmly screwed on, and I'm very protective over all parties. But when I go and see a house, I just think, oh, I love it, I want it. I don't care I know what's wrong with it, but I love it. So I become a purchaser very quickly. It's a very emotive thing. You have dreams and visions about a house you're going to move into. But I just say, we have a duty of care. Even though the purchaser with a mortgage val can't rely on that, they can't come back and say, oh, you overvalued it and you told us it was worth 500 and it's now only worth 490. They can't come back to us on that, but certainly the lenders can. But that's not why we do it. We do it because we need a sensible view on properties, and we want people to be able to carry out their dreams and aspirations. And most of the time, it's a long-term investment. And as we've all seen, prices go up and they do go down, and markets flatten. So we've heard in the media that there's a real big, post-COVID purchase regret. A lot of people saying, I bought it during COVID and I regret it because I was bidding against lots of other people, and because all prices were going up, it did value up, it was justified. but then they look at it and think, I've really overstretched myself, and now I can't have the kitchen or the bathroom. So I think I really don't want anyone to ever feel like that about somewhere they live.
And I think that point you made is particularly important. It's not just about the regret doesn't just end once you've paid for the property. It's actually, it might affect what you want to do with the property, and also things like whether you can have holidays and stuff, which I think are very important to all of us after COVID.
I agree, and I would also say a very current politically driven topics are cost of living, costs of energy, you know, and we all want that beautiful cottage in the countryside. You and I've got those, but we equally are saying, I don't know that I really want to see my next gas or electricity bill. And you know, if we're buying houses that need work, or we've paid and we've maxed out on the mortgage repayments, when utilities go up, all of us start to be concerned. So it's about quality of life, and it's about balance. And whilst I'm not the parent of the purchaser, I feel a professional responsibility to make sure that we do what we can at the beginning, so that people can just go on and afford life and to live in the house they bought.
And very, very final question, Sirah. The residential property industry is really broad. I know quite a few people who started in one part of the industry and then moved to another. I know that SDL takes a lot of SAVA qualified people into surveying. So what tips would you give to anybody watching this who's maybe in conveyancing or agency thinking, oh, I quite like to be a surveyor? What are your top tips?
I think to go onto the SAVA course, I would Google SAVA. I'm not an expert on that, although I do host SAVA events, and we look at SAVA students. There's a few entry levels. You can go back to university and do a surveying degree, and then you can apply for a trainee position with a surveying company. There is the SAVA route where they train you, and you have, I think it's 18 months to 2 years to work through different modules. We also offer an apprenticeship scheme. We're affiliated with Nottingham Trent University, so it's a 5-year scheme. We look at the person. They don't have to have had necessarily that much property experience, or sometimes not any. They might have come straight from A-levels, and they go to university 1 day a week, and they work for us in obviously a property related job, and they qualify at the end of it. Then we put them through our academy, and they go through their mandates. So there's a few different avenues, but what I would say is, if you are in property in any aspect of it, you will already have significant and relevant experience and an overview, and that will really give you a good leg up to the process. You'll have seen title plans, you'll have seen, if you're an agent, you'll have been out and measured up or taken photos. So I'd say that would give you a really good leg up. Speak to someone like ourselves, SDL, and see what avenues and openings there are. Speak to your local university, sort of property faculties. There's lots of different ways to retrain in all industries now. But what I would say is it's hard work. We're well rewarded. It's hard work. But it's so emotionally rewarding, and in residential surveying you do get quite a lot of autonomy over your diary, and you can really make it work to your advantage. So I'd thoroughly recommend it, but I guess I'm slightly biased. But I'd say, having been in the industry for 25 years, yes, I am going to be biased, but that in itself, I think, speaks volumes.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sirah. That's been fascinating. Really, really grateful for your time. And yeah, thank you very much.